My first year in graduate school, I taught English as a second language at the University of Illinois. Coming in, I had no teaching experience, and I was chosen to be a guinea pig. A professor had developed a complicated system for predicting the pronunciation of English words. A really complicated system. I mean, they looked like mathematical formulas, and math is not my strong point. This professor wanted to see if a totally novice teacher could teach in his system. Thank you, Dr. Dickerson. That fall, I would observe him teaching one day, and the next day I would attempt to teach the same lesson to my students. I spent that entire first semester pretending to be a real teacher, pretending to appear that I knew what I was talking about when I was literally one lesson ahead of my students. When we had our first child, TJ, I didn't feel like a real parent. You couldn't get much on the internet at that point, but I had 3 parenting advice Bibles on my shelf that we consulted regularly. As we stood over TJ's crib on his first birthday, we thanked God that we hadn't messed it up too much. When I agreed to fill the pulpit here at Tyner, I didn't feel like a real pastor. There are still days I feel like I am pretending to be the pastor. But over time, I came to feel more and more like a professor, like a parent, and like a pastor. But at first, I was acting as if I was a professor, a parent, a pastor. Have you ever felt like you were acting as if you had confidence when you really didn't? We're in the second week of a worship series called If, based loosely on Mark Batterson's book of the same name. Last week, I talked about the dangers of hanging on to regrets from the past. Sometimes we can get caught up in the if-onlys of not only the past, but the present. I had kind of a bad week. I can't tell you how many times I caught myself thinking, if only. Now, I didn't always use the words if only. Sometimes it was, I wish, or if you would just, or why can't they? Which are basically all versions of if only. The problem with getting caught up in an endless loop of if onlys is that not only keeps us from dealing with what is in fact happening or has happened already, it also keeps us from looking at God's if-only possibilities. Romans 8:31 says, if God is for us, who can be against us? If only we can live remembering that is true. Now, anyone recognize this woman? Now, Oprah hasn't been on TV for years, and I wasn't a regular viewer when she was, but I would watch an occasional episode. It was something I was interested in. Oprah had a huge following, and some of her catchphrases became widely used in the wider culture. One of Oprah's saying was, fake it till you make it. If you run into a challenge that is more than you feel you can handle, fake it till you make it. Have you ever faked it till you made it? Oprah's advice can be helpful at times, but we can take fake it till you make it too far. It's great for kids to act as if they are Batman or a princess or a bulldozer, like Jeff mentioned in the children's message. But even if they fake it very well, they don't actually become Batman or a princess or a bulldozer. And pretending that we're okay when we aren't isn't always good. It can cause us to avoid getting help when we need it. It can make some of us come off as faking or pretending to be better than we are. The song Truth Be Told warns us against pretending that we are fine when we're not. The number one criticisms of Christians is that we are hypocrites, fakers. God might see us as his prince and princesses, but the world surely doesn't. So how should we respond when challenges are too much, when we find ourselves struggling or even hurting? Is there a better option than faking it? I propose we don't fake it till we make it. We faith it till we make it. In fact, I titled today's sermon, As If. Faith it till you make it. We're focusing on verse 18 in Romans 8. Romans 8 is what we're focusing on in this series as a whole. And Paul writes to the church at Rome, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. So, in this world, we will suffer. Hope that's not news to anybody. Sometimes the world will convince you that you shouldn't have to suffer. We spend so much of our life avoiding not just suffering, but even inconveniences. When's the last time you saw a commercial promise inconvenience, let alone suffering. Heaven forbid I have to leave my couch to get a pizza or McDonald's when I'm watching the game on TV. Thanks, Uber Eats. Heaven forbid that I should suffer the pain of losing hair where I want it or getting hair where I don't. Heaven forbid I don't get the exact options I want on any item that I buy. I can think of at least one commercial that promises suffering. Military recruitment commercials. The military doesn't promise there won't be any inconvenience or suffering. And good for them. They promise you'll work harder by 8 a.m. than the average person will all day. Why would anyone sign up for suffering? Apostle Paul signed up in a big way. And unlike commercials, neither Paul nor the Bible promise an easier, more convenient life when we sign up to be Christians. They promise toil and trials, hardship, and even suffering. The Bible declares that everybody suffers. In Paul's words in Romans 8:22, all of creation suffers. Suffering can be physical, suffering can be mental, suffering can be emotional, suffering can be relational, suffering can be spiritual, but there will be suffering. We are a broken people living in a broken world. Things are not as they should be as God intended them to be, and this leads to suffering. If you are suffering, it's not because God doesn't love you. Sin caused suffering in the beginning, and sin causes suffering now. The broken world causes suffering, but suffering is not God's original design for us. Even those of us who are saved suffer. Those who follow Christ may suffer even more. In my devotional reading this week, it's by Dr. Maxie Dunham, who I mentioned before, and I admire this man as an extremely strong and devoted Christian. Well, in my devotional, he told the story of meeting with 3 Chinese couples in Beijing as China began to open many years ago. Dunham writes this: "These couples had suffered for their faith. Husbands and wives separated for long years as they were being re-educated for the communist kingdom. 2 of them had been tortured almost to death. As we prayed with them, it was obvious that these persons were in a relationship with Jesus far deeper than I had ever imagined possible. Christ was present in that room in such a real way that I felt I couldn't bear it. My own limited life of faith and limited experience with Jesus were made glaringly real." This man is one of my heroes. Being a Christian in America can at times be inconvenient, and there may come a time when American Christians might truly have to suffer for our faith in the same way that Christians in other countries suffer. Right now, there are Christians in Afghanistan choosing to stay in that country because they do not want people in their country to miss out on knowing Christ. And they want to be Christ to those people. I am humbled to think about that. Like Dr. Dunham, it makes me see my own life of faith and my limited experience relying upon Jesus' power in a glaring new light. There are many reasons we suffer. Some suffering is self-inflicted. No, it has been in my life. And some is other-inflicted. Some suffering helps us to grow. Some of us have grown closer to God through our suffering. But I'm not sure we're promised or owed a clear understanding of suffering in this life. But we will suffer. The question we each have to deal with is, what do I do with my suffering? Instead of avoiding all inconvenience and pain, instead of faking it till we make it, I propose we rely on our faith to help us in our suffering. We all suffer, so how can we suffer well? That's kind of a strange thing to say, but how can we suffer well? We've taught kind of parenting groups to different church gatherings, and one of them we've used is Pastor Chip Ingram's parenting advice, and he gives parents what he calls 5 stones as ammunition for their children to use to help them face the giants that will inevitably come their way in this world, to sort of equip them. His first stone: help your children learn to suffer well. Pastor Chip is onto something important. Have you heard the term snowflake recently? It's what one calls someone to make fun of them if they can't handle something. means they can't take a little heat. It's especially used to mock younger people. I have a friend who was a middle school principal. He said that more and more students are being given passes to leave class whenever they start feeling anxious or angry. So, for example, when a test is given, a student can give their teacher a pass and leave the class. We're even seeing something similar to this at Bethel University each year. Now, I don't like the mocking tone with this term snowflake is used, but it is true that many of us are too fragile and easily offended. I find it a bit ironic how easily offended some of the people who use the term snowflake are. Frankly, when any generation is mocked for something, I wonder if another generation might have just raised them to be that way. We could all probably benefit from having our feelings less easily hurt by what is wrong, and rather learning to be able to be inconvenienced or even suffer for doing what is right. Now, it is possible to push people too far or hard, but helping people avoid all suffering can actually hurt them in the long run. Many people are hampered in life not so much because of suffering itself, but because of their fear of suffering. Fear of suffering or inconvenience can actually end up being as painful as the suffering or inconvenience we try to avoid. Now, I don't mean to minimize anxiety or fear issues. They are real. And I'm not talking about serious anxieties. There are times we benefit from professional assistance with issues. I have the type of personality that doesn't like to feel incompetent. When I face a situation out of my depth, I feel extremely anxious thinking about asking for help to figure out what I need to do. But in my case, it's often true that the anxiety I feel is more painful than what I'm actually afraid of. I have anxiety about making phone calls, but most of the time the phone calls can go well for me. They're not nearly as bad as I imagine they'll be. And I feel relief and often satisfaction from having made the call or asked for help. Have you ever suffered more worrying about something than the pain the actual event caused? Paul tells us that our present suffering is not worth comparing to the glory that will be ours if we persevere. And what can help us persevere? How can we suffer well? Because of hope. Biblical hope is an I believe in the good yet to come hope, even when we can't see any good in the current situation. If you've been a Christian for a while, you can probably point to examples when God has gotten you through tough times before. Not necessarily out of tough situations, but through them. Many people's favorite Bible verse is Philippians 4:13. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. In the context in which that verse is written, it does not mean that we can get whatever we want. It means we can endure all things if we are in Christ. Knowing we can endure gives us hope. Hope helps us hang on. But the most important key to suffering well is faith. Hebrews 11:1 defines faith as confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Faith includes hoping and believing that something is true. But faith also includes fully relying on what one believes. We have hope in Christ, so we step out in faith. There was once a high wire performer who made a living by pushing a wheelbarrow across a line that was strung in the air, sometimes between tall buildings. Crowds came out in droves to watch him and cheer him on. Do you believe I can do it? He would ask them. Oh yes, we believe you can do it, they shouted back. So who will be the first to come up and get in the wheelbarrow? Now you can hope the man pushing the wheelbarrow will make it across. You can even believe the man pushing the wheelbarrow will make it across. But you don't really have faith in the man pushing the wheelbarrow unless you are willing to get into the wheelbarrow. True faith means getting into the wheelbarrow and giving Jesus Christ control of our lives, acting as if we believe what he promised us is true. That's the kind of faith that transforms our lives and helps us endure suffering. Paul is not exhorting us to suffer well in Romans 8 without having suffered himself. Paul put his life in the wheelbarrow and let Jesus take him through and over some serious stuff. In 2 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul writes, I have been in prison frequently. I have been flogged severely. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I was pelted with stones. I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been in danger from bandits. I have labored and toiled, and I have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst, and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. It's the keeping of the faith through suffering that makes someone a hero to me. My personal hero is my friend Cindy, who actually introduced Jeff and I to the spiritual formation workbooks of Dr. Dunham, whom I mentioned earlier. Cindy's been through a painful divorce. She lost her mother and battled problems with her father and her siblings and her children. She has come through the battles a stronger person because of her faith in Jesus. Do you have any heroes in the faith? Maybe a grandmother, a friend? Call them to mind. My guess is many of them have faced suffering. The goal of Christianity isn't to make it through life safe and sound, arriving at heaven without any suffering on the way. The heart of Christianity is the pursuit of Jesus and becoming more like him. And being like Jesus inevitably involves suffering. Suffering is often used by God for his glory, often in ways we may not see. The true measure of someone's love for someone else is not how warm they feel about the object of their love, though that's certainly a part of love. The true measure of how much we will suffer for the object of our love. A parent doesn't stay up all night, change nasty diapers, pay for everything a child requires in money and effort and time, because it always makes the parent's heart feel warm. Sometimes it is a pain raising a child. It is difficult. It is challenging. Raising children requires sacrifice. Because we love our children, we can and do get hurt. When we love someone, yes, we may feel passionate friendship or passionate love. We may feel great joy being with them, but we open ourselves up to suffering because of that love. In my experience, the most important relationships and the biggest victories in life often includes trials, even painful trials. How about you? Have key junctures in your life ever involved difficulty or suffering? Paul writes in Romans 8, verse 18, that as difficult as they may be, our present suffering is not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed to us. The glory that awaits us if we keep our faith will so outshine our present suffering that there is no comparison. One final thought about suffering well. Pastor Louis Giglio watched wrestling on TV as a kid. Anyone know what tag team wrestling is? Anybody remember watching? It might still be on. I'm just not a big wrestling fan. Well, each team has partners. One person on each team is in the ring wrestling at a time. Or it's supposed to be. They cheat. I've heard. When a wrestler gets in trouble, if they can reach out and tag their partner, the partner can jump in and take their place. Louis lived his life in faith like that. He would battle with life until he got in trouble, and then he'd think, I'll tag Jesus. One time Louis was reading the Bible and he saw more clearly the mystery of faith that Paul repeatedly wrote about. The secret to making it through the trials of life was not tag teaming with Jesus. Jesus and me wasn't the secret. The phrase Paul repeated was, Jesus in me was the secret. As if faith isn't faking it till we make it. As if faith is knowing that Jesus is with me and in me every step of the way, even when life hurts. Jesus is the key to knowing the glory of God and hanging on until it is revealed. The reflection to take with you this week is this. How can hope and faith in future glory make a difference in my life now? If you catch yourself suffering this week or even being inconvenienced and getting upset about it this week, remember that Jesus is with you and there will be a glory revealed in you beyond comparison someday. Keep reading Romans 8, the great 8. The good news keeps getting even better. Here's a verse that has been powerful in my life. I know I've shared it before, but it's well worth repeating. It's J.B. Phillips' translation of Colossians 1:27. And the secret is simply this: Christ in you, yes, Christ in you, bringing with him the hope of all the glorious things to come. Amen.